At 6:11 on a mist-heavy morning in the Ardennes, December 1944, Private Elias Mercer, a forward scout for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division, knelt behind a frost-slick fallen log, his breath turning to pale vapor in the freezing air. Snow clung to the pine branches above him. Silence hung over the forest, thick, unnatural, broken only by the faint metallic clatter of German boots on frozen earth somewhere beyond the tree line. Mercer had been operating alone for nearly 2 hours, moving ahead of his platoon to chart enemy positions near a narrow forest path that cut between two ridges. The path looked harmless, just churned snow, dead twigs, and a thin ribbon of trampled soil. But something about the terrain gnawed at him. The Germans were too quiet, too disciplined, too still. He scanned the ground again, a slight discoloration under the snow, a patch of disturbed earth where the frost hadn't fully reformed, a nearly invisible tripwire, glinting only when the rising sun hit it at the perfect angle. Mercer's heart tightened. Smart. The infamous bouncing Betty, triggered by pressure or tripwire. It launched waist-high before detonating, shredding everything around it with steel pellets. And this one wasn't alone. As he brushed a gloved hand through the snow, he felt not one wire, but two. The Germans had chained the mines to trigger in sequence, a trap designed to wipe out an entire patrol in a single catastrophic blast. Then he heard them, a German Feldgendarmerie patrol, 5 men, moving slowly down the path toward the trap. Their breaths were visible between trees, their rifles slung low, their pace calm. They had no idea they were seconds from walking into their own minefield, one likely planted by a different German unit during the chaos of the Ardennes offensive. Mercer froze. If he stayed hidden, the patrol would be obliterated. The blast would echo across the forest, alerting every German unit for a mile. His own division's advance would be compromised, and the enemy, believing they'd been ambushed, would strike back ferociously. If he revealed himself, he risked being shot on sight. But if he acted fast, faster than fear, faster than logic, he might be able to stop them before they triggered the trap. He took a breath, rose just enough to be seen, and shouted. What Elias Mercer didn't know yet was that this split-second decision, the choice to risk his life to stop an explosion meant for the enemy, would pull him into a deadly chain of events involving retreating German units, hidden charges, collapsing trees, and a desperate race across mine terrain that no scout in his division had ever attempted before. Mercer's shout cracked through the frozen stillness like a rifle shot. Halt. Minefield, don't move. The German patrol froze mid-stride, their boots pressed into the snow, breaths steaming, eyes snapping toward the lone American scout who had burst from behind the fallen log. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. The forest held its breath. Then the patrol leader, a Feldwebel with a wool scarf wrapped tight around his face, yanked up his car 98K. Mercer dove behind a tree as a round punched into the bark with a violent crack. Snow showered onto his helmet. He felt the vibration through his ribs. Stop. Stop, he shouted again, risking a glance. There's a trap, your trap. The Feldwebel barked a command. 2 riflemen spread out instinctively, taking cover behind trees, muzzles trained on Mercer. But the 2 men standing closest to the tripwire looked down and finally saw it. One of them, the youngest, went pale. Minen spare, es Minen, he shouted. The patrol stiffened with fear. They were caught. One wrong step, and the trap would obliterate them all. Mercer pressed his back to the tree, pulse thundering. He had seconds, maybe less, before the Germans decided killing him was safer than listening. He slowly raised one hand, fingers spread. Don't move, he called out. If you step back, you hit the first wire. Step forward, you hit the second. The Feldwebel hesitated. The man wasn't stupid. He turned and inspected the ground, saw the wire, followed it to the disturbed patch of earth, saw how perfectly the trap had been camouflaged. He lowered his rifle just a fraction. Mercer seized the moment. There's another mine, he warned. Side of the tree line. They're chained. You go anywhere, something goes off. One German cursed under his breath. Another checked his footing, terrified to shift even inch. The patrol was now effectively paralyzed, stranded in the center of their own lethal kill zone. But there was a problem. Mercer heard a new sound. Low, distant, muffled by snow, but unmistakable. Boots. Many boots. moving fast. He turned his head slightly and saw shapes emerging through the morning mist. Another German unit. A full squad. Likely retreating troops sweeping the forest for American scouts. If they appeared and saw the first patrol standing frozen in the open, they'd assume an ambush, and they'd unleash everything they had. Mercer thought fast. He crouched low, sidestepping the edge of the mine's trigger radius. His fingers brushed the cold wire. The metal was taut, sensitive. One wrong tremor could. Don't think. Move. He slid around the tree and pointed at the Feldwebel. You want to live? He said sharply. You listen now. The Feldwebel stared at him, assessing. The patrol's lives hung on one choice. Mercer lifted his boot and tapped the snow lightly, revealing another thin, metallic thread. S-mine 3, he said, right under your heel. The young German closest to it nearly fainted. The Feldwebel exhaled sharply. Then, in heavily accented English, he said, What do we do? Mercer didn't expect cooperation, but now he had it, and he needed to use it fast. Freeze your men, he said. No movement, not until I say. The Feldwebel barked a command. The patrol stiffened. Mercer took a breath and dropped to his knees beside the first tripwire. His breath fogged against the cold metal. The wire was so thin it disappeared when he blinked. He found the anchor point buried under hardened snow and brushed it clean with gloved fingers. It was a 3-point daisy-chain detonation rig. German combat engineers used it to trigger multiple mines simultaneously. Disable the wrong wire, and all 3 mines would blast straight upward, turning the clearing into a slaughterhouse. But there was something Mercer noticed. A detail so small most soldiers would have missed it. One of the anchor knots had ice crystallized around it. That meant it was older, placed earlier, possibly weakened. He could cut that one, maybe, behind Mercer. The second German squad was getting closer. Voices carrying through the trees, metal clattering, boots crunching. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He slid his combat knife under the wire. Breath held tight. Hold. Mercer whispered to himself. Hold. He applied pressure, gentle, precise. A tiny ping echoed under the snow as the frozen knot snapped. Mercer shut his eyes, waiting for the mines to launch. Nothing happened. He exhaled slowly. The first wire was neutralized, but he wasn't finished. He still had 2 more wires to clear, with another enemy squad moving straight toward them. The forest tightened around Mercer like a fist. The cold air tasted metallic, as if the mines themselves were exhaling frost. He pressed flat to the ground, breath fogging the snow, working quickly but silently. The Germans trapped in the kill zone didn't move, not even a blink. Fear held them like ice. The second patrol's footsteps grew louder, closer, measured and confident. They were no more than 40 yards away now, just beyond a line of fir trees. Mercer's fingers brushed the second tripwire. It was colder, smoother, less brittle, newer, recently placed. That meant it was live. Any attempt to cut it risked launching all 3 S-mines at once. The Feldwebel watched him with a mix of terror and focus. You cannot cut it, the German whispered. Mercer didn't look up. I know. He traced the wire slowly with his glove, following it to the junction buried under the snowpack. Beneath the thin crust of ice lay the 3-point junction box. 2 metal prongs. 1 central anchor, pressure sensitive. Tampering from the wrong angle would trigger the firing pin. But Mercer saw something else. A root, an old knotted tree root, pressed against the junction from the side. Not strong enough to break it, but enough to wedge the central clasp slightly upward, and enough to give a scout one narrow angle to work from. He slid the knife toward the junction, turning the blade horizontal. His breath slowed. His heart thudded, so hard he feared it would shake the wire loose. He heard the Feldwebel's breath hitch. Do not touch the center pin, the German murmured. I won't, Mercer whispered back. But there was a problem. The approaching patrol had stopped marching. Silence replaced footsteps. They sensed something. Then a voice called sharply through the trees. Not searching, not questioning, commanding. The second patrol was deploying. Mercer didn't have minutes. He didn't even have 30 seconds. He pressed the blade under the clasp, twisted it just enough to relieve pressure, then slid a pine needle thin, flexible. into the gap to hold the clasp up. The wire slackened. Mercer exhaled sharply. One more trap disarmed. He turned to the Feldwebel. Your men need to move backward. Slow. One at a time. Heel to toe. If they step sideways, they die. The Feldwebel finished grimly. Mercer nodded. The Feldwebel signaled the first rifleman. The soldier shifted weight backward, face white with fear. Snow crunched under his boot. Mercer froze. The wire trembled. Stop. The German locked in place, shaking violently. Mercer slid forward and pressed down on the junction box with his palm, steadying the anchor. Try again, he whispered. The soldier eased back. Slowly, slowly, the wire relaxed. He stepped clear. Mercer motioned to the next man. But before he could move, rifle bolts snapped in the distance. The second patrol had arrived in force. 8 silhouettes emerged from the trees, rifles raised, scanning the clearing. Their commander gestured. 2 men splitting left, 2 right, for advancing down the path straight toward the minefield. They were about to walk into the same kill zone. Mercer's pulse spiked. He couldn't shout this time. It would expose everyone, and his voice wouldn't reach them before they crossed the tripwire. He needed another plan. The Feldwebel whispered urgently. American, if they die, we die. They will think it was an ambush. Mercer's mind raced. The second patrol was seconds from triggering the mines. And then he saw it. A loose chunk of snow perched on a pine branch above. One flick, one distraction, enough to redirect their attention. He grabbed a pebble, flicked it upward. The snow chunk fell, slapping the ground loudly. All 4 soldiers stopped, weapons raised, heads turning, not forward, not to the mines, toward the sound. Mercer used the moment. You, he whispered to the Feldwebel. Call out to them. A warning, nothing else. The Feldwebel hesitated. His eyes flicked between Mercer and the death wires at his feet. He nodded. Stop. Minenfeld, he shouted in German. The second patrol froze instantly, discipline snapping into place. But 2 of them had already stepped within inches of the tripwire. Mercer's blood ran cold. He still had 1 wire left to disable, and it was the most sensitive of all. The forest felt smaller now, tighter, colder, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Mercer wiped frost from his eyebrows with the back of his glove, then crawled closer to the final section of the daisy chain. The third wire lay half buried under a thin crust of snow, so delicate it seemed to float rather than rest on the earth. This one wasn't old. It wasn't loose. It wasn't weakened by ice. It was perfect, freshly placed, set with precision by a German engineer who knew exactly how to build a trap that no one could cross. Even a trained sapper would hesitate to disarm it, and Mercer was only scout. Behind him, the first patrol stood frozen in place, afraid to shift their weight. The second patrol, startled by the shouted warning, held their positions with rifles raised, eyes darting between the wire and the Feldwebel. Snowflakes drifted between the 2 groups, enemy and enemy. Now both trapped inside a minefield they barely understood. Mercer pressed closer. The third wire was tied to a pressure-sensitive toggle pin, one that fired upward through a hollow tube the instant the tension changed. He couldn't cut it, couldn't lift it, couldn't shift it, couldn't touch it at all. He needed another way. He traced the wire to a small mound in the snow, no larger than a fist. Beneath it lay the S-mine itself, its steel casing buried at a slight angle. And that angle mattered, because an S-mine launched vertically only if its spring was unobstructed. If anything jammed the top of the casing, soil, a branch, a stone, the mine would fail to rise, and its explosion would be forced sideways or suppressed. Not safe, not ideal, but survivable. Mercer looked around. A fallen branch lay nearby, thin, just flexible enough. He grabbed it. Behind him, the Feldwebel whispered harshly. What are you doing? Buying us time, Mercer muttered. He slid the branch under the snow and pressed it against the mine cap, using the snowbank's weight to hold it down. If the mine fired, it would still detonate, but trapped under resistance. It wouldn't bounce. It wouldn't shred the clearing. Probably. Maybe. Mercer looked to the first trapped rifleman. Step back, he ordered. Right now. The man's eyes went wide. If I move. If you don't move, Mercer snapped. The next patrol will. The soldier swallowed hard. Then inch by inch he eased backward. Snow cracked. Wire trembled. Mercer's heart stopped. The toggle pin shifted. Only a breath. But the branch held firm against the mine cap. The wire slackened. Mercer exhaled hard and nodded for the next man. The process repeated, slow, terrifying, mechanical. One by one, the original patrol stepped clear of the kill zone. But as the last man moved, Mercer heard it. A distant engine, low, rumbling, approaching. He turned toward the forest road. A German Kübelwagen was weaving through the trees, headlights cutting pale beams through the morning mist. Inside were 3 officers and a radio operator. They were driving straight toward the second patrol and toward the tripwire. Mercer's stomach dropped. If that vehicle rolled over the frozen soil, the vibration alone could set off the entire chain. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He stood up. The Germans stared at him in stunned silence, rifles rising, fingers tightening on triggers. Mercer raised both arms high. "Tripwire," he shouted, pointing at the snow. "Halt." The Kübelwagen braked hard, skidding sideways on the frozen ground. One tire slid dangerously close to the buried mine. The engine growled. The officers inside barked confused orders. Every soldier on both patrols watched, breath held. Mercer rushed toward the front of the vehicle, and the Feldwebel grabbed his arm. "Stop. You will get yourself killed." Mercer yanked free. "If I don't stop them," he shouted back, "this whole ridge goes up." He reached the Kübelwagen's bumper, and another problem hit him like a hammer. The driver, panicked and confused by the shouting, pressed the clutch and rolled forward an inch. Just 1 inch. But the suspension dipped. The snow over the mine shifted. The branch bowed. The tripwire tightened. The toggle pin clicked. Mercer felt the vibration under his boots. The third mine was about to launch. He slammed both hands down onto the snow, threw his full body weight onto the buried S-mine, and shouted, "Don't move. Nobody move." The wire held. The mine cap shuddered. The spring compressed and stopped. Mercer's chest pressed into the snow, heart hammering so hard he thought it might set off the detonator itself. Behind him, the German stared in stunned disbelief. He had pinned an active S-mine beneath his own weight, but he couldn't hold it forever, and the mine had not disarmed. It had merely paused, seconds from firing. Waiting for the moment, he shifted his weight even slightly. The cold seeped through Mercer's uniform, numbing his ribs as he held himself flat against the snow, his entire body weight pinning the armed S-mine beneath him. Every breath felt like a gamble. The smallest shift, the slightest release of pressure, would free the mine's spring and send it launching upward, detonating inches from his chest. The forest was silent, not peaceful, terrified. The Kübelwagen idled beside him, its engine rattling like a nervous heartbeat. The driver stared down, pale and shaking. The radio operator clutched his set to his chest. The German lieutenant in the passenger seat, young, sharp-eyed, leaned out, looking from the wire to Mercer to his own men. He understood exactly what was happening. Mercer's voice shook as he spoke. "Cut the engine." The driver snapped to obey, shutting it off instantly. The vibration faded. The mine did not fire. One problem down. Dozens left. Behind Mercer, the Feldwebel was barking soft, frantic orders, telling both patrols not to move, not to breathe, not to trust anything but the ground under their boots. He stepped beside Mercer, crouching low. "You cannot hold this forever," the Feldwebel murmured. Mercer gritted his teeth. "You have wire cutters?" The Feldwebel shook his head. "We are field police. We expect trouble behind us, not beneath us." Mercer swallowed. His arms trembled. The cold stabbed deeper into his spine. The mine felt alive under him, a coiled snake waiting for its moment. "Okay," Mercer whispered. "Then listen carefully." He didn't know if these Germans trusted him. He didn't know if they should. But every one of them understood that the mine didn't care who wore what uniform. "2 men," Mercer said. "1 from each patrol. You're going to crawl to me. Slow. No sudden movements." The Feldwebel nodded and chose one of his calmest soldiers. The lieutenant from the Kübelwagen nodded and pointed to another man. The 2 crawled forward inch by inch, snow crackling softly under their movements. Mercer felt each vibration like a hammer to the spine. The mine trembled beneath him, threatening to spring. "Stop," Mercer whispered. "Now reach under the snow. Find the cable anchor." The two soldiers extended gloved hands beneath the powder. Their fingers found the wire. The cold metal hummed faintly from tension. Mercer swallowed. "When I say now, you're both going to lift together. Even pressure. Slow." Sweat stung his eyes despite the freezing cold. He counted down in his head. 3, 2, 1. Now. The two soldiers lifted the anchor point. The wire slackened. The tension pin dipped. Mercer felt the mine's spring relax beneath him. Just barely. "Hold it," he whispered. "Hold it, hold it." The men trembled, arms straining against the delicate resistance. Mercer slid one hand slowly through the snow. He reached the base of the mine. His glove brushed the cold steel. He felt the firing pin chamber. Still armed, still deadly. "Keep holding." He found the safety port. Empty. No safety pin. Removed by the engineers who planned it. He reached into his coat pocket and froze. He didn't have a spare safety pin, but he did have something else. A split ring from his own dog tags. He pulled the tags free, twisted the small steel ring open with his teeth, and fed it into the safety port, forcing it through with a slow, agonizing push. The ring slid into place. The mine's spring relaxed. The device was safe. Mercer exhaled so violently he nearly collapsed. "Okay," he whispered. "Let go of the wire." Slowly. The two soldiers lowered the anchor point. The wire stayed slack. The mine stayed silent. Mercer lifted himself off the snow, inch by inch, expecting an explosion at every moment. None came. He stood, slowly, carefully. The Germans watched in absolute disbelief. He held up the disarmed mine. "It's done," he said, voice weak. Silence. Then, the Feldwebel nodded once, stiffly. "You saved us." The lieutenant stepped from the cubble wagon, boots crunching on snow. He studied Mercer for a long moment. "Not just us," he said in German. "You saved everyone in this forest." Mercer didn't answer. He was too cold, too exhausted, too aware of how close he'd come to dying. He simply lifted his hands in surrender because these were still enemy soldiers. And it didn't end just because both sides survived a minefield. But something unexpected happened. The lieutenant gestured for his men to lower their rifles. "You walk east," he said quietly. "We walk west. No one fires." Mercer nodded. He stepped back into the trees, breath trembling, legs weak, heart still hammering from the weight of death he'd held beneath his chest. Behind him, the Germans began dismantling the rest of the mines, slowly, carefully, clearing a path through the forest. For the first time that morning, the woods felt alive again. Dangerous? Yes, but alive. And Mercer, frozen, exhausted, but still standing, knew that the next hour of the Ardennes would demand even more from him. But he was still here, still breathing, and the forest had not claimed him today. Long after the Germans disappeared into the trees and the cold wind reclaimed the clearing, Elias Mercer remained standing in the quiet forest, hands numb, knees trembling, breath frosting in the pale morning light. The disarmed S-mine weighed heavily in his gloved hand, its metal still cold from the snow. He stared at it, realizing just how close its spring-loaded core had come to tearing him apart. By the time Mercer made it back to the 99th Infantry Division's forward elements, his uniform was soaked through, his face drained of color, and his voice almost gone. Medics thought he was concussed. Officers thought he was exaggerating. But when they reached the forest path later that afternoon and saw the 3 chain mines, the daisy chain trigger, the frozen knots, the delicate angle of the toggle pin, and the deep chest-shaped impression in the snow above one of the mines, they understood. He hadn't just saved himself. He had saved them all. The accidental clash of German units, the confusion of retreat, and the brutal mine layer logic of the Ardennes could easily have led to a catastrophic explosion. Had the mines detonated when the first patrol approached, the blast would have drawn multiple enemy groups toward the spot. A firefight on that ridge would have alerted German forces across the sector, compromising the entire American advance in the area. Instead, one scout's decision to reveal himself and then hold an armed S-mine under his own body weight prevented a disaster for both sides. Mercer received a quiet commendation in January 1945. the kind buried in paperwork and never read aloud. Not a medal ceremony, not a parade, just a line in a winter operations report. Private Mercer prevented detonation of chained anti-personnel mines under extreme risk, safeguarding friendly forces and preventing enemy escalation. He never spoke publicly about the incident, never bragged, never claimed anything heroic. After the war, he returned to Minnesota and worked as a park ranger, walking trails, reading the terrain, sensing weather changes before others noticed. He was known for one strange habit: stopping hikers before they stepped into soft patches of earth, pointing out hazards no one else had spotted. "You learn to see the ground differently," he'd say with a faint smile. In military history circles, Mercer's story survives in fragments. An unnamed scout in the Ardennes, a minefield incident, a German patrol that mysteriously retreated without a shot fired. But among the few men who witnessed it, the memory remained painfully vivid. A solitary American scout, face pale with cold, lying chest down on the snow while the forest held its breath, choosing to save even the enemy rather than let the forest erupt in steel and fire. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps keep these long-form battlefield stories alive. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether anyone in your family ever served in the Ardennes or worked with combat engineers. And if you want more cinematic, deeply researched war narratives every week, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.